It is recording. Hi, I'm Isabel.
Hey, it's Wind, and you're listening to our second episode of Synergy. Yeah.
Last week we had the theme of what was our theme? It was not
Impetus.
no, it was
No, impromptu.
yes,
Impromptu.
tune.
Yeah.
The theme is
Awakening this week.
uh,
Seems
yeah.
like a good foundation for us to start because, generally speaking, I think what we want to do is continue to share our journey of the awakening from when it began and how it continues to evolve. And it's our story, but we have a lot of knowledge of what other people experience based off the work that we do with other people in their journeys. And
That's
so there's common themes that occur across the board.
It is, and it seems like I know we've talked about our awakening in the last episode, but it feels like I've been hearing so many people talking about this in the past week, like between last time
Oh,
we spoke and today.
really?
Okay, there's so much more to dig into other than our specific story.
Correct. Yeah. Because
I'm
it's really like synergy is pulling everything together. So if we just only talked about ourselves, I don't know, that'd be synergistic at that point, really. So yeah, I mean, it's really everybody involved. And yeah, I mean, like what's a good example? Like what kind of stories have you heard this week about
um,
awakening?
Well, I've heard a lot of people talking about their own awakening, so just connecting with people and I have a friend who's going through it right now, and she's like
Oh, wow.
going through tons of night sweats and like different things, and I guess we should start by defining what is awakening, but I feel like awakening is a journey, and it's
Mhm.
never, you're never fully awake. So there's,
Mhm.
I don't know how you see it, but I see it as if there's different levels of
Mhm.
awakening happening. And right
Yeah.
now, there's people who never talk to me about spirituality and
Mhm.
like connecting with spirit that did talk about that in the past week. So they're starting to open up the doors, like at work more specifically. So
Okay.
really interesting.
Really at work. So you're getting people at work that are starting to essentially sort of awaken or come out of the closet to you.
Right. Or be just showing some interest and be like, so what is awakening? And for me, maybe we can talk about that, because I think
Yeah,
different people define awakening in a different way.
it's
But
true.
for me, it's like it's basically starting to have the awareness that you have a spirit side, right? A spiritual
Mhm.
side of yourself.
Mhm.
We were used to have the mind, the body, but the spirit aspect, which I call the Trinity, is,
Yeah.
is often disconnected and comes along a little bit later in life. Um,
I share that with you. And when I was in my second time down to the Amazon with Allison, when we came out, I did a little time, took a little my GI Bill benefits from the VA and went to college at Boise State University in the summer, and I took a couple bilingual classes or literacy classes. And anyway, the professor kept talking about awakening, but his idea of an awakening was from an intellectual, philosophical level. And even Osho will talk about how philosophy, you just have to show up. You don't have to make any sort of transition or change. You just show up and you either agree or you disagree with what people are communicating about. So
but
that's not really an awakening. Assimilating information is just assimilating more information. And maybe it leads to, maybe it becomes an impetus for a bigger energetic awakening. And I think when we're talking awakening, like you said, night sweats and things like that with your, then we're talking an awakening that leads to the ascension and evolutionary process. Um, but I don't know that we could fully define that, because who knows where anybody really is in the journey, whether they're doing it intellectually or not.
right.
So I think it's fair to say that awakening could take many different forms, but just expanding your mind and calling it good doesn't, it just means that you have a little more expansion going on. The
Yeah.
awakening that you and I are really probably here to talk about is the awakening that does cause the night sweats. It causes the Kundalini activation that I randomly had. It causes the visions and the ultrasensory experiences, these kinds of things.
Yes, absolutely. And I see it like almost like it's it's going into that state of consciousness. And I know people say I'm conscious, I'm talking, I know what's going on, but for me a
Hmm.
state of consciousness is where you have the awareness of not just your physical reality but different realities that are
Right.
around you.
Yeah.
And that state of consciousness, the more you become, the further you go along your journey of awakening, gets
Hmm.
the state seems to be present more often. It's easier to reach.
Yes.
Like, so that's how I guess I see it, is like that state of consciousness where you'd have the capacity to be one of the first step is probably capable of observing your emotions, like your
I
physical.
was just thinking the word, you become the observer
Yeah.
of, so that's funny. I think we must agree on that as maybe a key ingredient then, since we weren't even, I mean, we were totally, obviously telepathically sharing that word. You become an observer of self through your experiences and through the experiences of the collective around you.
And you said something to me one day that was like, it was like a, we call it in French an aha moment. It was like,
Uh,
ah, like
uh,
light bulb moment. And it was in regards to how the mind can be an observer. Do you remember
mm.
that?
I don't remember saying that, but maybe it was during the session that we had exchanged. But I
Yeah.
do share that a lot when I'm doing sessions for people. Let the mind become the observer, as
Yes.
opposed to like a kid sitting on the stadium bench watching the football game, as opposed to the one who wants to be down in the field playing. No, be entertained and watch the game and give the mind something to do other than trying to participate. Like just let it be entertained, and then it goes, whoa, this is freaking cool.
Yes, this is brilliant. I love your analogy because like as soon as you said that, it kind of flipped the switch for me that, oh my goodness, like I can actually be awakening in a state of consciousness, but still using my mind, but
Hmm.
as an observer as opposed to
Hmm.
an active player. And that was just
Yeah.
awesome when you share that.
It's so cool. I mean, Eckhart Tolle talks about it. The Dalai Lama talks about it. You know, the Buddha talked about it. It's not like it's anything new, but we always have to have sort of a zap, an electric zap with it to
Yeah,
comprehend the difference between talking about being the observer and actually feeling that sensation of what that is like.
yeah, exactly. And I don't know, for me, like my awakening was starting to observe things outside of my own self. For
Mm,
example,
yeah,
starting to notice numbers. Numbers was one of the first
yeah,
things that brought
yeah.
connected me with spirits, and I
Okay.
noticed the license plates that were different than others, and pay attention to
Mm,
the number, or seeing the time like 111 or 1111 or 222,
uh-huh.
like seeing that all the time.
It was so cool. I mean, that and bird feathers were signs for me in the beginning.
Yes.
And then I went into an area and in the early aspect of my awakening when I was going into the dark night of the soul, the shadow work deeply. And suddenly I was in this place on the beach in Ecuador for several weeks where drugs abound and police didn't really do much about it. And everyone's doing lines of cocaine around me and everything. And I was getting zero signs for 9 weeks, zero. And I was like, wow, where am I? What's happening? Because it just was an abrupt stop because it had just been so synchronistic, synergistic, getting me to that place. I knew I was supposed to be there.
Okay.
And then I get there and all the signs stopped. And it was like I was in a vacuum or a void. And I couldn't pull in guidance no matter what I did. So I started to do what anybody else would do when you're in Babylon and just started to partake in the things that were going on. And it led to a fight, which I knocked the guy out. I broke my hand, uh, that had to have replacement surgery on my hand 4 weeks later, or reconstructive surgery. It was, but that knocking that guy out put me right back into the signs.
Interesting.
And all this energy was running through me when it was going on. I just saw all this blue and white light as if Archangel Michael was running through me and giving me the energy to do this. And after that, so I knew I was doing the right thing energetically. I would have judged myself if it hadn't been for that.
Yeah.
And everybody did judge me hardcore, and I stayed strong because that energy was so strong in me. And it wasn't the first time. A year prior was the first time that energy ran through me in my Kundalini awakening for 4 days,
Okay.
and told me that I was having a Kundalini awakening because I didn't even know what that was.
Yeah.
And so this knocking this guy out brought all the signs back in, and suddenly I came back into self, and my shadow work was essentially done. I mean, it took a couple more years to really comprehend that it had done.
Yeah.
The mind took a long time to really wrap itself around that my shadow work was done. That's a whole different topic and a whole different podcast probably.
Yeah.
But the point was, you were talking about number synchronicity and how powerful that was for me up until that point for a couple of years, and then to have it just stop was very unique. And then once it came back on, I learned how to start using it in a different way along the way, to the point where in the last few weeks, the numbers 4 are just blowing up. It's like, as much as I'm seeing your face on video right now, I'm seeing 4s. And it's because I'm doing certain things now that are totally aligned with everything that I've ever wanted.
Awesome.
So it's like these number synchronicities are actually, they're numbers that will stand up to us and have a unique imprint in our DNA, our wiring.
Yeah.
4s mean something to me and a lot of people, but not to everybody. People who have number synchronicity get it in 3s or 7s or 6s or multiple number sequences.
Yeah.
And there's a way that they're defining what it is that we're manifesting.
Yeah. That's such a good point, though, when you say, like, it means something to me, because we both had an awakening. We both see, like, signs. For me, it was license plate on cars, but for someone else, it could be completely different. And I think it's about finding the synergy, finding what are like, if you're not, or if you're just starting your awakening, you'll call it coincidence, right? Like,
right.
Coincidence.
Yeah.
Weird.
Or synchronicity, but yeah, coincidence is mostly in the beginning.
Yeah, people will think it is, but I always believe everything's planned and it's a flow, and
right.
It was meant to happen that way.
Right, but it's true. Before awakening, you just call it a coincidence, or you might not even see it at all.
Right, like you'll be thinking of your mom, and your mom calls as soon as you think of her, and it's like, yeah, no, that was telepathic.
Yeah, it's true, but we just kind of like, we get kind of flippant and we brush it off.
We brush it off, yeah, absolutely. You're in a great mood, you get in your car, and it's your favorite song that play. Well, it's just
right.
vibrating at that level.
Right, exactly. Yeah, and that's good. I mean, maybe that is something we could talk about, is like, there's so many ways to talk about the awakening, but why? Why the awakening? Why is it so important to pay attention to these things, is what anybody wants to know when these things start to happen.
That's so
why?
True. Huh, I never see it that way, but yeah, why? Well, for me, I can only talk about my own journey. It has opened up so much more joy and happiness, and more connection and sense of purpose. And also, I always talk in other, like, classes or things that I do, I always talk about the human experience, and how it's important to have the human experience, but to live it fully on earth is to connect both the mind, body, but to the spirit. The three of them has to be together. And the why is because once you do that, your life is like completely different. And we've talked, I think, at the last episode about suffering, and when you have those experiences, everything start making sense. So if there's a major event like a divorce, I went through a divorce, but somehow I went through it with almost no suffering. And I think I can only, I guess everything happened that way just because I was awakened. I was looking to those that synergy, and seeing like the bigger picture, as opposed to being the victim of my own little situation that was happening. Does that make sense to you?
It totally does, and I think that it really does answer why, because I know so many people who start to experience these things, and then they just, it's like they're dabbling in the experiences, and there's an aspect of their mind that I can feel that feels like a bratty little child. It's like, so what, so what? Well, it's fine, you can have that experience, you can die with that experience, and that you'll have never done anything really wrong. But the reason why those things are really tapping at us is not just because, oh, like we're suddenly going to become something that we can't comprehend, which is true, but there's a reason why, a reason behind that, and it is to bring us greater joy and more alignment with what it is, all of that we've ever intuitively, innately inside, within ourselves, known that
Yeah.
we want.
Yeah.
And we think we want to change the world. We want the world to be a better place, and we want the world to be this, and well, nobody can agree on what that is because we all have different points of view from the mind.
True.
But inside, we know how we want to be better, our best version in the world as it is. So then, when we get to that point where we're operating at our best, suddenly the world is exactly as it has been, but we don't see it that way anymore.
It's so true. Yes. Like and it goes back to being the mirror. You're mirroring, like your reality is mirroring your inner self, right? Like what's
Right, right,
inside. And the reason why you want to be open to your spirituality and awaken and have your like pure consciousness happening
yeah.
is to have that same reflection in your world around you.
Right, right. And why the bratty side of people comes up is because they still think that the world has to change and
Yes.
that they don't.
Yeah.
And that when the world changes, that maybe they'll start to make their changes because inside I know I'm the fucking bomb.
Yeah.
And I have plenty of validation from that. And I show up for work and I make good money. People love me, like, but Trump still sucks, and like
That will never
this and that, and and the economy and capitalism and blah blah blah. Well, those things aren't going to change
the situation.
anytime soon.
No.
So you can't wait to sell some unknown point in the future to decide that you're actually going to let yourself be happy in the world and actually change your butterfly effect, your ripple.
Yeah.
And when you do that, that's what creates the change. It goes back to Gandhi saying, be the change you wish to see in the world.
Right. And that's where like this whole sentence takes so much more meaning
Uh-huh.
when you're like conscious of like that reality that if you change your inner environment, you're changing everything around you.
Exactly. Literally, you change the environment around you, and that's what you don't know will happen. And then you don't even have to concern yourself with changing anything around you. It just automatically reflects the joy that you carry. And so therefore, everywhere you walk, it's almost like this increasingly brilliant scenario is playing out in front of you. Even if you do have a road rage incident around you or whatever, it's like it becomes so minor compared to what it used to be.
Yeah.
So the world is changing because we are changing, and it starts with becoming the observer.
Yes. So true. Because if I think back in 2009, when my awakening kind of slowly started, um, my life is completely different today. Like completely different.
Hmm.
I have different friends. I have a different relationship. I am so much closer to my family. I'm in a different country, different city, different job. Like everything is so different.
Hmm.
But yet it cannot feel more truth and real and exactly like where I am supposed to be at this time today. Like I don't have that need to go somewhere else or be with someone else. And
Hmm.
our first episode, we didn't talk about it, but I just got married to this
Hmm.
amazing guy.
Oh, right. We didn't talk about that last week. We meant
No,
to.
the same day. That was,
Yeah, yeah.
but just thinking back of like what I've manifested in my life since
Mm.
being more connected to my inner self and being more conscious and being
Hmm.
an observer, it's just unfolded like in an
Mm.
amazing way.
Yeah, I agree with you, and I don't know. Do you experience these things when you experience an actual paradigm shift in the moment, where suddenly all these lessons that have been like building up, pushing you into this like tension where you feel like it sucks, you don't want to live, you can't breathe, everything hurts so bad, you want to just check out, and then suddenly you have that aha, like that push through, and then you're not going back. It's almost like what I experienced, and I don't know if you do, where I like in that instant, it's a micro moment. All of a sudden, I can almost look back and see the old self that just got dropped off,
Yeah.
and feel the release from that old pattern. And then I get these sensations. I get these voices that run through me that it's very much like an angel or something. That's like acknowledge the beauty of that human because he was doing his best and he was loving his life despite the suffering that he was experiencing. Acknowledge him, love him, so that you can go forward even more. I don't know if you experience stuff like that.
I do actually. I do. And I'm always grateful for learning lessons, the like it I guess one thing, you're right. Like it doesn't stop the craziness and the crisis and the roller
Hmm.
coaster from happening. These
Hmm.
still happen. And I remember someone saying like when you're the awakening, so if someone is not in the awakening phase before that, they go to work, they come home from work, they go to bed, they wake up in the morning, eat, go to work, that's it. And after the awakening, you go to work, you come home, you go to bed,
Hmm.
wake up in the morning, you have breakfast, you go to
Hmm.
work. And it's true, like your life doesn't change in some way,
Right.
but it
Right.
does in so many other ways.
Yeah, it's like, or the Buddhist quote that before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water.
That's
So
it.
what? You're still going to be in a human body, and you still in a system of um, currency.
Yeah.
Need to have currency to support yourself, unless you've figured out how to be fully off grid. And people are giving that a go more and more, and finding different ways. And it's
Yeah.
all great. And I think we will get to that point, but we're not at that point now.
Right.
So it's true. We still, my brother-in-law, Allison's brother, read Eckhart Tolle's first book, The Power of Now, and loved it. But he said, I'd still like to know what that book would be if Eckhart Tolle had written that when he had 3 children, a wife, and a mortgage to pay and a job to hold down the fort. Would he have still written the same book?
Yeah.
And I agree. I think Eckhart Tolle might be a little obtuse in his understanding and his delivery, because there's, I think that's what you and I are here to talk about, is practical awakening, practical enlightenment,
Yeah.
allowing these things to occur, but to synergize with your everyday life
Right.
more and more, and to know that you don't have to be a radical. I mean, you don't see, you've gone through a lot of different changes, but you're still working, you know, as a program manager, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
Whereas I became a sadhu, I became a wandering saint and literally a vagabond, and that doesn't seem to ever want to change. So my life completely went up, flip side, and that's the way that was guided for me.
Yeah.
So it's just different for everybody. Not everybody needs to get a tattoo on their forehead and grow their hair real long in dreadlocks and become a yogi. But if you want to, that's an option.
Right. If
But
that's what you feel called to, right? If that's your
right,
calling, that's your calling.
right.
Mhm.
And you won't know if you're holding off these signs. All you're doing is just hurting your inner system, because your inner system is begging for that evolution, and you won't know until you get into it. And honestly, by following the flow, it makes everything so much easier. And this is what I would say the why of awakening is,
Mhm.
what you were talking about earlier. It just makes everything so easy. Not so much, not so easy that you don't have challenges, but it's like going with the river instead of trying to swim across it or upriver.
Right. It goes back to that idea of being the observer. Like you're just observing your life going and yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, what other symptoms have you experienced in your awakening that were interesting to you?
Um, well, for me it was like I got the feathers too, weird animals just appearing around. So that was definitely something that started, and I still have that strong connection, specifically with birds.
Mm,
I see eagles everywhere. Even
mm,
when I moved to Portland, that's so funny, Portland, Maine, there was
mm,
this huge article like a couple months after I moved that for the first time they saw a bald eagle in the area. And I'm like,
Wow.
I brought it.
I believe that. And it's okay for us to recognize that's true.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another thing is for me, like I was getting all those messages and intuition, but to trust it was
Hmm.
probably the toughest part that I had because you think you're crazy. Like
You totally think you're crazy.
and
Everybody else thinks you're crazy all of a sudden.
exactly. And then you kind of don't talk about it because you don't want people to judge you, right?
Right?
Like you're in bed and you wake up because you heard someone say something, but you're alone in the room, and then you're like, was that a dream? Or and even dreams, I remember like it doesn't do that anymore, but I used to have dreams um that were so clear, would wake up and it actually would happen. So predictive dreams, I guess. I don't know.
Hmm. Yeah.
And someone told me that that was happening to me because I was resisting connecting
Hmm.
with my intuition and resisting that spiritual world. So the more I resisted, the more it was trying to push it to be like, hey, trust your intuition.
Wow.
I don't know. Did you experience something similar?
Um, wow. Yes, of course. I mean, I don't know that any of the awakening stories that I've heard, I've experienced an aspect of it on some level, sometimes more, sometimes less, but yes to every awakening experience, pretty much. Which I think is why, because I was meant to be a teacher, so you have to know, like you can't be a drug counselor if you don't know the drugs, or an alcohol counselor if you don't know what it's like to be an alcohol a dependent person. So I can't be an awakening guide. I can't be an enlightenment guru. I can't be a tantric teacher unless I understand these energies and these experiences firsthand. So yeah, I've experienced definitely everything that anybody could experience in my own way
Yeah.
that made sense to my life and my life purpose. So
Mhm.
that's where there's a lot of symptoms you'll find about awakening online, and those were so helpful for like the first 2 years from 2011 through 2013. They were really helpful for me, but I outgrew them.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean. And then when I outgrew them, I thought the awakening had stopped and I was now just in ascension. And then my shaman teacher, who's from here in North Carolina, where I live,
Okay.
but he lives down in the Amazon and has for a couple of decades. I went there with Allison, my second time there with him, and Allison's first time, and he's like, I don't understand why you keep saying it when your awakening happened. He's like, awakening doesn't stop, and it's just like a light bulb flipped with me. At first, my ego didn't like that because I thought I was so advanced, and then I realized, oh, it doesn't. There's no such thing as fully awakened in our current human form. There's no such thing. There isn't a single enlightenment teacher that has reached an entire realm of enlightenment. It's not possible, and that's where I have still kind of remained sort of a critic of any enlightenment teacher, including of my own self, because it's fun to act like you've got it all, and what you mean, what you understand when you get to a certain point is that you have enough to work with, so that you don't have to be caught up off guard anymore.
Right. I just want to share this right now. There's this huge butterfly that is flying outside my window.
Whoa,
and
wow.
and what I want to share about that is that the awakening is butterfly is very present in people who are starting to awaken because it's that the growth that they go through as a butterfly is just
Yeah.
amazing. So
And
butterfly.
over and over and over again. It's like you become a caterpillar, then a butterfly, and then a caterpillar, and then a butterfly. Over and over. Each layer of unwinding of old systems, essentially.
The beauty of it. And I remember looking a documentary about butterflies, and it's quite painful for them to go through
Yeah.
the process. Like
Yeah.
it's a death.
They die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it
But they live through that death almost,
yeah.
which
And
is like the awakening.
right. And when you were asking, like you were talking about like how like it's like that paradigm shift that you like die and then you move into something else, right? Like
Yeah.
you didn't say
Mm.
die, but you said like you shed, like you can
Yeah.
feel that energy leave.
Yeah.
that package. It's interesting because for me, one of my biggest awakenings so far in terms of intensity of energy
Uh-huh.
was a day before I graduated as a Reiki level 3,
Mm.
which is they call it the master Reiki
Mm-hmm.
practitioner. And it was so interesting because literally the day before, so the Sunday was my graduation, the Saturday
Mm-hmm.
is the day that I separated from my ex-husband.
Wow.
And but somehow I was saying that was not very as painful as some people experienced it. Somehow I understood that because we were not vibrating on the same level energetically, it had to break. That relationship had
Mm.
to break. And the day after I graduated, and I had in Reiki, you have initiation where like it literally it's like it's just bringing new energy into you. And they always say like you go from like uh a tiny little like water faucet to like a big hose of energy that flows.
Totally.
Yeah. and
Huh?
and that's exactly what happened. And you're right, it allowed me to feel like that energy leaving, but yet be grateful for that crisis to happen. And I didn't see it
Mm-hmm.
as a crisis. Like everyone around me were like so sorry for me and
Mm-hmm.
crying for me, but I don't think I shed much more. I don't think I cried much. Like it was
Mm.
just like it was so clear in my head. It was like, yeah, this is meant to happen this way, and that's okay. This is me moving on to the next level.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's,
That's really cool. I think it also attests to, on one hand, your mastery that's already inherent. On another level, I think it also speaks to some things are just more painful for us than other things are.
yeah,
I mean, because again, like, let's just use politics because everybody's always wanting to talk about that.
yeah,
Seeing Trump's name as president doesn't trigger me,
yeah.
you know. Um, I don't actually think anybody's would at this point. I'm pretty sure that's true. But when I was a voter, when I did care, before my awakening really took a hold of my life and switched all my gears, I think Trump's name would have excited me
Yeah.
as opposed to being really, I was really angry, for instance, when Obama was elected. And so if I had been an Obama person, I would have been totally opposite. So the mind really does pick and choose what things trigger it and what things don't, you
Oh,
know? And
yeah.
so, you probably have had bigger triggers than your divorce brought to you,
Oh, yeah.
but somebody else going through the exact same scenario as you, that brings out the whole world of Pandora's box to them. Whereas something that has triggered you stronger is kind of menial to them if they went through the exact same experience. We all have different things that and they're really based off of our life lessons and maybe even other lives that we've already mastered these things,
Yeah.
or or already mastered them in this life, already overcome them. Who knows? There's so many facets to and variables to it all, but yeah, I think the big thing in awakening is to know that not everybody, and this is what I see is problematic, if there is such thing in the awakening, is trying to commiserate, trying to say, well, I'm experiencing this and this, so we should all be calling ourselves awakened and enlightened and equally triggered by this thing, and let's make a group out of it and let's call it an awakening.
Sorry.
Exactly my response. It's like saying, let's agree to all have the same miseries, and we're going to call it enlightenment. I want to know how that's different than the world before awakening.
Yeah, that's so funny, but it's true. And I've noticed some people that are like known psychic or very popular, like in the spiritual world, that have that
Yeah.
anger energy and that
Uh-huh.
trigger energy around them.
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
that's kind of why it makes me laugh, because we definitely
Uh,
see it in the world of like spiritual awakening people.
yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that's really one of the facets that caused you and I to say we want to do this show together, is to start to break up that, because give an alternative
Yeah,
to the person who actually has a thinking mind that actually functions, that says that way is not really making anything better than it's already been.
right.
You know, we want to appeal to I want to be a little asshole right now and say we want to appeal to actually people who actually can think. And yes, I'm purposely being a dick right
And
now.
I'll be the good cop, and I'll say everyone can be there. Can
Everyone can be there. Yeah, we're giving you an option.
Yeah,
There is a world outside that allowed, and I mean, but aside from being smarmy like I am, I really do feel so connected to why we're doing this podcast, for that reason, for the people who do know, like, hey, I'm experiencing these things, but everybody is talking about things that just feel icky to me, like more angry, and like that's not going to propel my journey any. And I want to be able to relate. I can't relate to a big teacher like Eckhart Tolle or to the Dalai Lama. I can appreciate them, but they have a lifestyle I can't relate to, like my brother-in-law about Eckhart Tolle's first book. So we need more and more people who have gone through this journey or deeper into the journey, who can also be like, I can still relate with you, and and say, hey, you don't have to get tied up in the drama. It's true, because that's not really actually, that's not what the awakening is for. It's to get you out of the drama. And you can't, and if your tractor beam is, if you're like trying to tether into a master teacher like Eckhart Tolle or Dalai Lama or Buddha, that's a big leap from where maybe you are right now, and you need more and more relatable people that you can go, okay, this makes a little more sense, and then you can be at that point where you're talking about things like the Dalai Lama and Eckhart Tolle and all these other teachers, and have more of your own, but by then you'll have your own influence and your own flavor evolved, and your own comprehension of what they're talking about. And I just feel like that's an important bridge to be made in this time and age, because it's almost like there's one extreme or the other.
absolutely, absolutely. And that's just a human mind driven by the ego, always want to go black or white. And
Right.
it's fascinating for me to see the US going into that duality so intensely right now.
Mm-hmm.
Just
Mm-hmm.
like it's the perfect storm building up, right? Because
It is.
all of a sudden people will start awakening and
It's true.
hey, wait a minute, like we can no longer continue dividing our country like this. Let's
Right.
move into that synergy and let's move together.
Yeah. And instead of getting caught up in the drama, you don't have to get caught up in the drama. You don't have to go out. And I'm not going to say there's anything wrong with being an activist or going and doing a women's march or anything. Like, wholeheartedly go do these things. But that's the key, is like really wholeheartedly in oneness. Not, and oneness has nothing to do with I'm against something. So that's where activism actually cuts its own dick off. It's just like, despite its own sexuality, its own body, its own presence, it goes and just like severs its truth before it even gets started by going out with an oppositional approach.
Exactly. And it fascinates me how people think that they'll change the world that way. Like
Right.
it just fascinates me because
How many years, how many thousands of years has activism been going on, and what great change has that brought in the world to this point?
no,
Some people might argue, well, it's done this and it's done that, but the truth is, we still have all this discourse, all this negativity and all this polarization. So it really hasn't fixed anything yet.
yeah,
So
it's
the awakening is supposed to get us to the point of understanding that we, number one, are the answer, and that we have to go inside and we have to discover how we are the answer. Not the one, not the Matrix guy, Neo, who's going to go out and save the world, or any of those other movies, but we become activated into our true light and our true energy flow and our true self, in a way that then is already, the problem's already solved then.
exactly because you're doing everything with integrity. Like you are your own truth, and you're
Right.
listening to your heart, and and when I say heart, I'm talking about like the spiritual heart, that
Yes.
purpose, that connection, which for me is like one of the plays that I connect with the most when I want to have like, okay, what is the truth? What is my truth? What are
Hmm.
when I'm looking for answers, or where I'm looking for confirmation, I always go to it, and
Hmm.
that's when you say like as your wholeheartedly, like you go into these things, whether it's activist or whatsoever. But
Yeah. Yeah. It just suddenly become more of a kind of a beautiful player in something that makes you feel good to be a part of. And
yeah,
now everybody will say, well, I wouldn't do something if I didn't feel good to be part of. But I would beg to differ. I would beg to say that most people who are out being protesters are just bandwagoners and don't necessarily feel any strong connection to what they're doing. They just are being a bandwagoner. They're not really thinking about it at all. They're just doing what everybody else is doing. Something is guiding them into that for whatever they're trying to learn, but they don't necessarily. And when it comes down to it, they're actually following somebody's ego who's saying, let's oppose this thing. They're following somebody else's ego. And so they're not really actually showing up as their best selves. If you show up as your best self, I might show up to a women's march and just be like, wow, I just love that humanity does these things. And that's the grandfatherly and the grandmotherly way of being. And when you're really starting to operate in levels of enlightenment and you don't have to be 60, 70 years old and have grandkids to hit that point of beauty and acknowledgement that everything in life is so just as it is, and it's fine. Or it can be amazing, however your perspective takes you. But you don't have to wait till you get to be that old to hit that point. And the sooner you do it, the more now you open up those remaining years of your life to things that you just would never imagine except in your deepest inner desires from when you were young. Then those become on your palette of being able to use, because now you're free to use those things because you're not constantly trying to battle a system that is only designed to make you look at yourself more.
exactly. Oh yes, I like how you phrase that. Indeed. I want to go back through the journey of awakening though, because there's
Okay.
something that keeps popping in my head, and it's
Yeah.
something that actually happened with someone close to me this week. And this friend of mine is starting, I can see like she's awakening, and she's been going through a rough patch for the past year or so, like a hard time. And it's interesting because yesterday we were interacting and she was sharing with me how like everything was awesome and she can finally be the observer and let go
Mm-hmm.
of everything. And from my experience, when I get in that state of like, yeah, I'm really good at everything, all of a sudden, I don't know for you, but all of a sudden the universe will throw something in my
Yeah.
head and be like, let's see if you can deal with that.
Yeah.
And I shared with her and I said, well, I said, I just want you to stay in awareness, and because I suspect that something might challenge you in staying in the let go and surrender state. And I
Mm.
said, just be the observer. Like soon as you see like your emotions getting triggered, like just go back to your surrender. And fair enough, by the end of the same day, she connected with me and she's like, oh my goodness, something happened and I cannot stay in my state of inner peace.
Wow.
I think it's funny. I shouldn't laugh at it because for some people
It
it's
is funny.
so hard, but I think it's so funny because that's
It
how
is.
the universe is. That's how it
Yeah.
works. Like you think you can handle it. It's like, yeah, I am fully awakened, like nothing can change. And then all of a sudden, bang, it hit you
Yeah.
right in the face.
Because your ego is going at communicating that I'm so infallible, I'm invincible, I got this awakening. Oh, really? Here's another one. Are you sure?
uh, so I think it's funny. Sometimes like I'm just shaking my head looking up, because for me looking up means, talking to spirit, and I'm like, really? Like really?
Yeah. Right? Oh man. I can't. Yeah. I know. There's so many times where I've been like, "Fuck you, angels! Fuck you, universe! Like, I mean, just as recently as back in October on my motorcycle ride from Santa Fe to New Orleans, or Dallas, and then New Orleans, and then Florida, and then, I mean, that like first section of my motorcycle riding was pure hell for hours, 13 hours a day. And I mean, I was just yelling all sorts of things, and I had nowhere to go but forward. I had to. I mean, it was my only choice. Tight budget, big storm behind me. There was nowhere to go but forward into the abyss.
Yeah.
And I was just yelling constantly, and it did no good. It just made me start laughing into my helmet, and then singing random songs. And I wasn't much of a person to sing,
Okay.
and it really just all of a sudden I was forced to face the humor, the levity of the whole situation, and realize that I was safe. I had a motorcycle that was working fine. I had places to be that people were going to be waiting for me to arrive. I
Yeah.
had money in my pocket, not a lot, but it was there. I mean, I had everything I needed,
Exactly.
and more,
Yeah. Yeah.
more
It's
than I could
true.
count through my ego.
Yeah, it's so true. And it's amazing when you have that capacity to go back to that idea. I was observing, I have two dogs, and I was observing them yesterday. Like one of my dog did something and I was like, "No, don't do that." And all of a sudden like she was like she knew I was mad at her, right? But then a moment after she comes to me and she's all happy and I'm like, "This is awesome." Like animals have no capacity to hold a grudge. Like
Oh yeah.
it's just, but yet humans, we are so good at it. And that
Mm.
goes back to like, if we can always be the observer, we realize that, oh, like we're safe. Everything is fine. Like I'm sitting here, I have everything that I need in this moment.
Mm.
And yet, if there's a danger or an imminent danger, something, we react to it. And that's okay too. It's also being conscious about it, right? Like
Mm.
it's not that nothing dangerous can happen or whatsoever. It's just that you're living in the moment all the time. And I think by doing that, you're connecting with your spirit self. Because I read some books about people who react a certain way under like dangerous situations,
Mm.
and sometimes it's just unreal what they do, and you're like, what made you think of doing that? And
Oh
I
yeah.
I truly believe it's because they were in their consciousness, like they were totally in the space at that time, connected with their heart and capable of just acting on it the way that spirit told them to, or whatever you want to call it,
Mm.
the way that their inner self told them to do it. So,
Yeah. Yeah. I think, you know, and we were talking about this on in a little class last night, and it just always comes down to, in the awakening, you should be learning how to remove judgment and remove fear. It's really that simple, and there's no loophole. There's no loophole. You have to go through it. One and two. There's kind of no exception. Like you have to, across the board, all things that cause you fear and or judgment, which really come from the same place. Once those things are become eradicated, and it starts with one situation. That's it. Like you just got to be in a situation and go, I'm being triggered right now, and not allow yourself to be, but instead allow yourself to just find some kind of calm and comfort in the situation.
right.
At least to stop yourself from being triggered, stop it, and and then let it be a gradual process. But really, an awakening is just, if nothing else, you don't have to see aliens and fairies and angels. You don't have to do any of that. you, if you just eradicate fear and judgment, you're already putting yourself in the flow of heaven on earth, of this divine union of our angelic or divine, whatever we want to use for even if you're an atheist, like you essentially, you can just remove this sort of space in yourself that wants to react to everything, and it just comes down to fear and judgment.
That's
And there's always a but. The mind will always have a but, and if you have a lot of buts for that, well, then you're the ass.
well said. It's interesting you say that because I never thought of it that way. And now that I think back, I've been eliminating a lot of fears that I had, like fear of spiders, fear
Mm.
of I like the last one I did actually happened in January this year, or January.
Mm,
It was my fear of going snorkeling.
mm,
And I don't know why. I've always been terrified in the water. And I was born next to the ocean. And I love being in the water. But if I don't know what's in the ocean, I'm
mm,
not I'm not comfortable. And I
mm.
tried to remove that fear. It was a goal I had this year. So I went snorkeling, and I can't believe I've missed all that my whole life, because
Yeah.
I went snorkeling. There was like sea turtles. It was amazing. And then all of a sudden there were dolphins. And I'm like, I can't believe I missed all that, like my whole life.
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
beautiful. It was
It
perfect.
is. That's cool. And I mean, what a challenge, right? Because it's so funny. Our fears really do stop us
Yeah,
from a very beautiful experience.
it does. It was magical. I can't believe I stopped myself from experiencing that this whole time.
I mean, it's interesting. I probably share that with you when it comes to lakes more than oceans. Um, I don't know if it's the enclosed body of water, it's a little more stagnant. I'm not sure, but lakes tend to get me a little bit more. I'm not sure. I haven't been in one in a while, so maybe that's also shifted.
Yeah.
I'm always open to finding out, but I also don't think I need to. I don't live now to go out and test things either. Like I could probably always find something to go test fear against, and I also just trust that if I really want to do something, I'll deal with whatever fear might want to stop me from doing it. Um, but yeah, it's I don't know, fear and judgment, and you had this beautiful experience all of a sudden, and you got to play in the water and be
Yeah.
part of it.
It was just magical. Yeah.
Yeah,
It was unreal. And now thinking back, I'm like, that fear makes no sense. Like,
at all, right? At all. I know.
not at
It's
all.
it's fun though going through them. Now, I mean, because now you have the juxtaposition of what it was like to be
Yeah.
afraid
Yeah.
and the release of not being afraid. So now
Exactly.
you actually know the two different worlds, and there's a growth that occurs because of that.
Yeah. And you're
We
right.
shouldn't rule out fear and judgment as bad things. We should just say that they're good teachers. Maybe that's a good way to say it.
Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah. Definitely
Yeah,
teachers. And just like intense emotions and triggers are great teachers too.
they are. They're urging us closer to our truer self, and we
Exactly.
should. The more we embrace them and go in through them, the more we can uncover what's kind of behind them.
Yeah.
Um, and there's so many ways to do that. Some people are thrill seekers. They live for the adventure. That's one way. Yeah, I mean, there's so many ways.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah.
this is great. So, anything else we should share with our listeners about the
I'm gonna
awakening?
ask you the same. I mean, I feel like we threw a big plethora of information out for people to chew on for this episode, maybe.
Yeah. I know right now we're in the setup of our podcast, but
Yes.
it would be great to hear from our listeners, some from you guys. Like,
Mm,
what is your awakening? Like, what are you
yeah.
through? And I think for me, I know that sharing this with people that had the experience, or at least a common knowledge of what is the
Yeah.
awakening, helped me so much. Like to
Yeah.
just be like, okay, this is confirming a lot of things, and I'm not crazy.
Yeah, exactly. Totally. Yeah. If nothing else, when you experience the signs, know that you're not crazy. I wouldn't recommend not going to the doctor if you feel that you have to, because can be helpful. But if you're calm enough, you can probably uh, kind of work your way through some of the things that might be physical or even psychological up to a point, but never, yeah, certainly I always have said, never stop yourself from going to get help if you're
Yeah,
experiencing things, but just start to learn in the process, still try to learn to listen to your inner guidance as well.
yeah,
And
that's such a good point. Like I know now, I still go to the doctor. Just you still have that human
mm-hmm,
aspect. Like, I
mm-hmm,
need confirmation, make sure everything's okay. But at the same time, like sometimes I have physical symptoms, and I'm like, okay, like this is weird and
Hmm.
makes no sense. And again, I'll connect to my heart, and usually the message that I get, it's like it's gonna be temporary. Just go through it, accept it, love it, and
Yeah.
just move on.
Loving it is the number one way to start to kind of break up the fear and to find out what's behind it.
Yeah,
For
exactly.
sure.
That's so true. So yeah, physical symptoms can be a pain in the butt.
Oh yeah, and they are, and they're very real as you're going through them, and yeah. But there's always something. Every physical ailment, whatever, it has something behind it, and learning how to experience that is where the teaching of it lies. And but there's just so many different variables to all this, and it doesn't have to be done overnight. It is a journey.
It
It's
is.
not supposed to be done overnight.
It's never done,
It's
right?
never done. Yeah, it's like one lesson at a time,
Yeah.
and sometimes it seems like there's many lessons at one time. It's really just many facets of one lesson that are hitting at one time.
Yeah. But you're right. It gets easier in the sense that you start recognizing your cycles and what's going on.
Uh-huh.
Okay, now
Yeah.
I'm at the bottom of the roller coaster, or I'm going
Yeah.
up, and
Yeah.
it's so
So
true.
true. Well, cool. I don't know. I'm gonna guess we probably tackled a big chunk of stuff today that would be helpful. And yeah, I agree with you, Isabel, that the listeners, this is all about really interaction. And while it's also fun to listen to stories, um, the point is that uh, we are our stories, and the collective is a collective story. And the more we all communicate with each other, the more we all grow. No real enlightenment teacher would ever propose to be a master and not a student.
Yeah.
In fact, you get to a point where you're more of a student than a teacher, and everybody else thinks you're the master. So it's kind of interesting. You should always be learning. We should always be growing through each other's experiences. So
Absolutely.
yeah, share with us.
Absolutely. Yeah, Win and I would love to hear from you. So we'll definitely create that platform and space
Yeah,
to share.
definitely.
Yeah.
All right, cool.
Great.
It's been
Well,
fun again.
fun again. And until
Until the
next
next time, adieu, right?
Yeah. All right. See you, everyone.
Bye. See you next time.